Hello and welcome to my channel. In this one I wanted to do a drawing of an African sunset with a leopard on a tree, but here I will try to use only oil pastels. The paper I'm going to be working on is a UART 800 sanded paper, this time a slightly larger format, about, I don't know, maybe 13 by 9 inches. And the oil pastels I'm using are the Chinese Gesso oil pastels. Now, in many of my previous drawings I used a combination of oil pastels and colored pencils. I would normally use the oil-based polychromos colored pencils in combination with oil pastels because it's so much easier that way to produce tiny details. In this one I'm going to try to do a detailed drawing using only oil pastels. I'm going to play around with a couple of different techniques and see what I can come up with. So I started out by putting down some bluish and violet tones at the top, and then making a transition towards the slightly warmer orangey tones and yellowish tones in the middle. For the part of the scene, because it is a sunset, for the brightest part of the scene where we can see some of those rays of the setting sun, I used a bright yellow color or a light yellow color, and then I will gradually make a transition towards the slightly darker and more orangey tones. Now, don't ask me about the reference, I can't provide one. For this one, I actually kind of put this together using a combination of a number of different reference photos. And as you can see, I'm getting a little bit of muddying here and there. With these oil pastels, all it takes is a speck of pigment and it can muddy the colors in some parts of your drawing, but I'm not too worried about that because I can layer over that eventually, or I can draw some details in front of that, or rather on top of that. So I realized that I needed a little bit more of the pinkish tones, so I started introducing a little bit of pinkish color here between this transition between the upper cooler part of the sky and this warmer part of the sky. I created that transition using a little bit of that pink and a little bit of light beige, and then kind of blended those two together. Here at the bottom I switched to some slightly more reddish orange, like a cadmium orange, and then went over that with a little bit more of that pink and light beige in order to be able to create some sort of a transition. I was sort of playing around with colors because I didn't know exactly what it was going to look like. But I just kept layering colors and blending them until I was sort of close to what I wanted to achieve. Right now the colors aren't exactly where I want them, but because you can layer these oil pastels and they are pretty soft and creamy, and because this surface allows me to put multiple layers, I'm just going to keep adding some more. Anyway, a few more words about the surface. I talked about this a number of times, but I'm going to say it again. By the way, I made this top part of the drawing a little bit darker. I felt that it was too light. So the UART 800 is a sanded paper. You don't have to use sanded paper, but with oil pastels I prefer to have a little bit of tooth. It doesn't necessarily have to be sanded paper, but I feel like this UART paper works pretty well with oil pastels. Anyway, as you can see, towards the bottom of the drawing I started introducing a little bit more of those pinkish and violet tones, kind of making another transition towards slightly cooler colors. We're going to have some clouds here at the bottom, but I have to decide which color will be appropriate for them, because it has to stand out against the background, so it has to be quite a bit darker so that the shape of those clouds near the horizon would be visible. So I blended in a couple of different colors and came up with some bluish purplish shapes that kind of look like clouds, and now I'm just sort of softening them with my finger. This will do it for the most part for the sky, and once that is done I'm going to start drawing some trees and stuff like that, but I have to finish the rest of the sky here at the bottom. I'm going to add a few more scattered clouds here and there using this bluish color. This is something like let's say an ultramarine. The reason why I'm trying to describe the colors rather than giving you the exact numbers or names is because I don't know them. They're all in Chinese. This is a cheap Chinese brand, but it works pretty well, so I can just describe the colors to you so that I can sort of explain my process. And obviously if you're using a different brand of oil pastels, or maybe even different medium, you're going to try to approximate with whatever colors you have in your range. Anyway, I was kind of thinking about doing this in soft pastels rather than oil pastels. I'm not really sure why I decided to go with oil pastels. I guess I wanted to push myself and to try to see if I can draw this scene using only oil pastels, but I always, or at least that's how I felt lately, is that oil pastels are actually turning out to be a little bit messier than soft pastels. With soft pastels you have all that dust residue, but with oil pastels sometimes you get these smaller specks that just stick, and they're very difficult to dislodge or layer over them. Anyway, I'm starting to draw some trees, some foliage here at the bottom. I'm going to do this with a black oil pastel, and you can see that I'm using my usual approach when I draw trees, drawing small marks that resemble either individual leaves or groups or clusters of leaves. So that's going to be a group of trees at the bottom to suggest that we are looking at some kind of a wooded area with lots of trees in the background. And I want to vary the shape and the placement of those tiny marks so that it looks like foliage. It has to feel random. And all you have to do for this is just use a black oil pastel. The reason why it's black is because it's against that light in the back, so it appears really dark. Now I could probably try to go with some other dark color, but this is simpler. So again, I'm trying to make the top part a little bit darker. I'm adding a little bit more of these darker bluish and purplish colors. Because I'm trying to make a little bit more sense out of those clouds and out of that scene. I'm going to have to rotate a little bit in order to blend a bit more efficiently. Because blending can be difficult when you're dealing with something that can smudge easily, and you just need a different angle in order to be able to blend more comfortably. As you can see, most of the time I'm using my fingers to blend, but I'm kind of switching between them. Anyway, one of the main challenges when working with oil pastels is drawing thin lines. Now, I need to draw a very detailed and elaborate shape of a leopard coming down from a tree, and I want to place it somewhere like this against that lighter background, so like a silhouette of the animal. So I drew the sketch and then I applied some oil pastel on the back. What I'm trying to accomplish is, when I trace over my sketch, I'm hoping that I will have some darker lines. The reason why I opted for this approach is because I can't really afford to try to do a sketch on top of so many layers. I'll try to use other means of achieving fine lines, like a tortilla and the edge of an oil pastel, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Anyway, so I'm going to try to trace over this, but first I just want to dab on it a little bit, push it against another piece of paper, just so that it doesn't leave too much of the oil pastel, of the black oil pastel, and I'm hoping that it won't create a mess, because the colors that I have underneath are pretty bright, so I can't really afford to play around with my sketch too much. When you're doing a sketch, there will be mistakes and you're expecting that you'll be able to correct those mistakes. Here that won't be the case, so I only have one chance to do this right. So I have my simple sketch done in graphite. I have a little bit of oil pastel, black oil pastel on the back of that paper. And now I'm going to trace over that, and I'm going to hope that some lines will appear. So let's see how that goes. I'm just trying to follow the shape. So you can see why this would be a problem if you can imagine why this would be a problem if you were trying to do this directly on top of the layers and layers of oil pastel. I already did that elaborate sunset scene, and I have many layers of pastel, and it's all very sticky. So if I try to rest my hand on it or try to play around with it and do a sketch, maybe I make a small mistake, maybe my hand causes a little bit of smudging, it would be a mess. So let's hope this will be a little bit cleaner and more efficient. So as you can see, that didn't really work out as I expected. We can see some lines, but they are not as dark as I expected. Most of the time I created something like indentations in the layers of pastel, but I can still see the shape of the animal, which is good. So I do have some kind of a sketch. I don't really know if you can see it, but I can see it. It's there, so I'm just going to have to draw on top of it. And the way I'm going to draw on top of it is using a black oil pastel, but you can see that it has a fine edge here. Alright, so I'm going to use that edge around the pastel, and I'm going to use it to draw thin lines. Now if you don't have an edge like that, if you already used a pastel and it kind of became a little bit more round, you're gonna have to cut the pastel. The reason why I'm not afraid to use these is because I can buy black pastels separately, so I can afford to play around with them. Now immediately you can see that I am actually able to draw some relatively thin lines. I'm holding a piece of glassine paper under my hand to try to avoid making a mess, and as you can see I'm able to draw some thin lines. They're not as clean, not as precise as if I were using black colored pencil, let's say, but I think they're pretty close. This is not supposed to be a super detailed, super precise drawing anyway, So I think that for a wildlife scene that is somewhere in between a realistic and impressionistic drawing, I think it will do. The only thing that I have a problem with right now is because some of the marks that I'm making with the black oil pastel aren't as dark as I would want them to be because of all the layers underneath. So I will need to find a way to deal with that problem. They're pretty dark, as you can see. I am creating a very nice amount of contrast and tension between the object in the foreground and the background. But I'm going to need to work on that, and I'm going to need to see if I can apply a little bit more of the black pastel in order to create more contrast. I used a tortillon to try to clean up some of the edges here and there. I don't really like the shape of some of these branches. I'm going to work on those. Now I'm going to try to do a little bit more work on the main subject, meaning the leopard. And as you can see, the edge of my pastel has already worn down a little bit, and it's becoming a little bit more round. But now that I have those lines in place, I can just start filling in the rest, and I don't really need such thin lines, and I don't need that much precision anymore. I'm trying to make the shape as dark as possible. Every now and then it helps when I go over it a couple more times, because sometimes there's a little bit of muddying, sometimes the first layer isn't as dark as I would want it to be. There is, because there are multiple layers underneath, there is some muddying. The black is not exactly pitch black, and I don't know, it's just a slightly different color than I expected, but whatever. Now the thing that I want to achieve with this leopard is I don't want it to be like a black silhouette. I don't want it to be completely dark. Instead, I want some parts of the leopard's body to be illuminated, which means that we're going to have some spots, some darker spots, and some yellowish and orangey colors or shapes between those. So I'm putting in some orangey colors here. Those are the parts of the leopard's body which will be illuminated by that light source, by that sunset. So I'm now using the oil pastel to dab and to draw some spots. And some parts of the body will be completely in the shadow, so they will be much darker, and others will be like a combination of lighter and darker shapes, maybe. Right now it doesn't look like much, but once I kind of connect those larger shadow areas and establish that large contrast or a strong contrast between the larger areas of lighter and darker value, the shape of the cat's body will become a little bit easier to understand, and that's why hopefully the whole scene will appear more realistic, more convincing. And also the anatomy of the animal will start to look better. Not that I'm an expert on the cat's anatomy or the big cat anatomy, but I'm just hoping that I can get it to look close. So the same thing goes for the tree, by the way. This part of the tree will also be illuminated a little bit. I want some part of that tree bark to be a bit lighter, whereas most of the rest of it will be in the shadow, I suppose. I threw in some reddish tones here as well on the leopard's body, like a combination of yellowish and reddish details maybe. And the same thing on the tree. You can cut the pastel like this if you want to create an edge. And that way you can draw some thinner lines again if you want more precision. But here I'm kind of going over some parts of the drawing in order to get slightly darker shapes, darker marks, darker values, because the initial layer wasn't really dark enough, I suppose. So just going back in and adding some darker details or lighter details as needed. I am able to do quite a bit of layering, but as you can see from the overall shape of my drawing, I can't really do it with too much precision. There's only so much you can do with oil pastels when you're trying to draw smaller details, especially on a smaller format. This is not a super small format. Like I said, it's about 13 inches in height, about 9 inches in width. So slightly larger than most of my drawings, I suppose, but still not a very large drawing. So it's very restrictive because of the medium that I'm using. The oil pastel doesn't really give you that much precision with colored pencils. This would be easier. Anyway, now I'm going to apply clear gesso. Clear gesso is an acrylic primer that creates a textured surface, but I've also used it as a sort of a varnish because it fixes the oil pastels in place and creates a surface that is neither completely matte nor glossy. So it looks pretty nice, plus it gives you some additional tooth so that you can put some more details and layers on top. It works pretty well actually. I use Liquitex Clear Gesso, but you have to apply a very, very thin layer, and I apply gently with a soft synthetic brush, and it doesn't smudge my drawing. The good thing about oil pastels is because they're sticky, they don't really move when you apply a thin layer of clear gesso on top of them. So I won't ruin any of the details. Once this dries, it will be clear and it won't change the appearance of my drawing. But it has to be a thin layer. And you have to wait a little bit for it to dry. It depends on the humidity in your room, but it may take a little bit longer or a little bit less time. I don't know. If you want to be safe, you can wait for about a day. 24 hours should be more than enough, probably. Anyway, now that it has dried, the layers underneath are fixed; they don't smudge. And I have a little bit more tooth to work with because that was clear gesso. Clear gesso gives you a bit of tooth. And what that will do is it will help me apply new layers, new details, and more vibrant colors or darker colors if necessary. So you can see when I'm applying this black color, I'm actually getting deeper, darker values than I initially could. So basically I will get more contrast, more tension between the foreground and the background elements. This is very good for me because it will increase the range of value and it will make the darker shapes stand out more strongly in comparison to the lighter background. I'm also going to modify the shape of some of these branches a little bit and then go back in and add some darker details to both the tree and the leopard so that I can get some deeper, darker shadows. And as you can see this way, I may be changing some of the details, but I am making the shadow areas a little bit darker. And another good thing about clear gesso is that I can also go back in and even add some lighter layers when necessary. I'm also modifying some of the smaller shapes like the head the legs, just trying to improve the anatomy of the animal a little bit so that it looks a bit more convincing. There's not too much I can do about that. Obviously, I'm not working with a pencil, but like I said, I think I was able to achieve a great deal of precision considering the fact that I was working with oil pastels, which are rather large and clumsy, let's be honest. So just trying to clean up some of the edges, trying to add some finer details. Here on this sunset area, I'm gonna add some more lighter value with this lighter yellow color. I want some brighter colors around that setting sun. Some more contrast. Just doing a little bit of blending and a little bit of refining here and there. The drawing is done. I put my signature in the lower right corner, and this is what it looks like. I hope you like how the scene turned out. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, if you want to see the longer version, the full-length video, you should check out my Patreon. You'll find a lot more content there. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.